I'm Lisa Bagshaw. Welcome to Bold Leaps, the show that interviews creative, inspiring, successful people about the risks they've taken to pursue their dreams. And today's guest is award-winning comedian, writer, actor, Brent Butt. As a child growing up in a supportive and close family in Tisdale, Saskatchewan, Brent loved doing two things, drawing and making people laugh. At 2, he was drawing Moby Dick and was told he had real talent. At 12, he saw his first stand-up comedy routine on the Alan Hamel Show and was mesmerized. At 20, he had his own office on Main Street and started his own publishing company, Wind Wolf Graphics, and was writing comic books. Thinking stand-up was a pipe dream and drawing would be his backup plan, he was accepted into a prestigious animation school. But after only 4 days at the school, Brent pulled the plug. Why? He realized if he didn't commit to stand-up comedy, he would always be miserable. What I wanted to know was, when you choose to fully commit to a passion, how does it change the trajectory of your life forever? Welcome to the show, Brent. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. I found it very interesting in that introduction. I like that.
You're absolutely fascinating. And this is such an incredible story. So I just really want to get into it. Obviously, you are incredibly successful with not only your stand-up comedy, but the Corner Gas, the live action, Corner Gas, the movie, Corner Gas, the animation, the movie No Clue, the sitcom Hiccups. I mean, you're incredibly successful at whatever you do. But for the purposes of this show, I want to focus on this initial leap.
All right.
And because I think there's so many interesting, inspiring lessons in it. So if you can, take us back to prior to being on the campus. What was your life like, sort of jostling the two interests of drawing and making people laugh?
Well, really, like after high school, it was pretty much a straight shot to Oakville, to the Sheridan College, to study animation. But like I said, I realized 4 days in that this is not how I want to spend my life. And I sort of knew how I wanted to spend my life. And like you said, I knew I would be miserable if I didn't commit to it. So I pulled the plug on animation, but there's a gap between that and sort of, okay, how do I do stand-up? And during that time, I did a lot of different things, different odd jobs. And, it helps when you're living at home. It was just me and my mom. So my rent was $0. That's very helpful. I recommend that to anybody who's starting out. But yeah, I was, 18. From 18 to 20, basically, I was living at home trying to figure out what my next steps were. And the next sort of big step for me was starting this publishing company with my friend Colin Olexon. It's a guy that I grew up with. And I had approached him with an idea that I had for an 8-page comic book filler that I thought maybe we could sell this to Marvel. We'd write it, I'd draw it, and so I told him the idea that I had, and he said, that's kind of interesting. And he went away, and I think it was the next day, he said, let's go for coffee again. And overnight, he'd flushed this dinky little idea that I had into something that was, really had legs and could go on forever. And so my immediate thinking was, well, great, we're never going to sell that. Nobody wants to buy a big series from 2 people in northern Saskatchewan, 2 kids that nobody's ever heard of. And he said, so what, we can't do it? And I said, no, we just have to start our own publishing company. So that's what we did. I've always been kind of entrepreneurial. I've always been even as a little kid, I was trying to sell drawings to my siblings. I would draw and I'd be like, hey, you want to buy this for a dime? And they'd be like, get out of here. But I was always sort of drawn towards the notion of creating things and trying to sell them at a profit.
Well, in my research, what I found really fascinating was you saw the stand-up, so you were drawing from an early age, and you saw the stand-up routine on the Alan Hamel Show.
Yeah.
And you had a very supportive, influential teacher who really believed in you. And you actually did stand up a couple of times in the high school.
Yeah.
So you had that happening, and you also had the drawing happening.
Yeah. Anything that didn't involve studying or schoolwork, I was there for. I was like, just doing cartoons and cracking wise, telling jokes. I was down for that. Even my actual schoolwork, anytime I would try and convince my teachers that instead of writing a 10-page report on something, what if I did a radio play and act things out and do care? I was more drawn to, that kind of creative side of things instead of just an exchange of information or a relaying of information. I always wanted to find some way to make it kind of, it was more interesting to me to find a creative angle to it. It was life-changing to me seeing that stand-up when I was 12 years old, because I had never seen stand-up before. I'd seen lots of comedy on TV, sitcoms, sketch comedy, that kind of thing, but just seeing a guy walk out and talk and be funny, I didn't know that was a thing that happened. And it was a comedian named Kelly Monteith, and I can't even tell you how impactful that was, just watching that guy standing there talking, getting laughs. Because as of that moment, it became my sort of life focus. And I walked out and I said to my mom, I want to be a comedian. And she said, go do it outside. That was her standard response to, I was the seventh kid, so she'd been through it all. I'm kind of a blessing that way. The seventh of seven. By the time I came along, it was like, whatever you want to do, fine.
Well, take us to, because I do think this is sort of where it all happened, other than that moment where your mom said, do it, or you saw the stand-up and you said, I'm going to do this. You're on the campus, and you presumably, you had to apply for this, and you got into this procedure.
You had to pass they sent sort of an exam that you had to pass, drawing certain things. They would tell you scenarios and you had to draw them, and then they judged based on that whether they thought you.
So it was a big deal to get in, but I'm wondering, how did you feel on that fourth day at that campus when you decided, no, I am leaving here and pursuing my dream? How did you actually feel at that exact moment? I had some trepidation even driving out to Ontario.
It was exciting, but at the same time, there was this nagging little, is this the right thing to be doing? And on the drive, I was thinking of stand-up material, and I was making notes, and I was like writing jokes on the way to go do something else for a living. And so I was already sort of questioning it, and just sort of realizing what was involved in animation, especially at this time, because this was in the mid-'80s, like this was 1984. So it wasn't, there was no computer animation at the time. This was all hand-drawn on cells. And the realization that the very likely scenario for me would be, I would get a job somewhere where I would be in charge of drawing hands for some character for, the rest of my life, or drawing mouths. You're the mouth guy. Oh, that's a lot of fun. So I just kind of, I came to the realization that this is not what I should be doing. And, like you said, I came from a supportive family. My main concern was, if I called my mother and tell her that I don't want to do this, that I want to get out, is she going to be sort of upset? Is this going to... And she just said, if this isn't for you, just come home. And it was just, I can't overstate how fortunate I feel to have had this sort of supportive family. So when you make these kind of strange or unusual decisions like I've made in my life, and my parents' attitude growing up was sort of like, if it's not illegal, go ahead. And that was pretty broad strokes.
Well, on that note, we are going to take a break. But when we come back, I'm going to ask Brent what happened immediately following making this massive leap. Welcome back. So Brent, I want to take you back to immediately following the days after you left the campus and started your new life with a commitment to stand-up comedy. How did you feel in those days and immediately days and weeks following that decision?
Well, really, for me, it was because I was in a small town in northern Saskatchewan. I couldn't just go down to the local comedy club because such a thing didn't exist. So for me, there was this time period where I was, making ends meet, doing odd jobs, like I was working as a drywaller and, doing different things and making a buck with my artwork a little bit and selling and anything to make a buck, really. And then, and I'm trying to figure it out. How am I going to, am I going to just go right to Toronto, and try to do stand-up there, or go to Vancouver, or, and then a comedy club opened up in Saskatoon, which is 2 hours from my hometown. And at that same time, my buddy and I had started this publishing company to do the comic book, and so we went to Saskatoon to do that, because he was also in university. And so I signed up for amateur night. And everything sort of fell by the wayside. Everything was pushed to the back burner, and my life just became about, amateur night was every Thursday, and it was like preparing 5 minutes of material for that upcoming Thursday.
And how did you feel at that time? Were you scared? Were you
not really scared?
Afraid of failing?
It was very exciting. I wasn't really afraid of failing. Like, I always knew that it was an option. I don't know why. I was, I think it's ingrained in me as a kid. Like, the reality that, like, I remember hearing the first time I heard the phrase, failure is not an option. Mm-hmm. I always thought, what are you talking about? That's like, it's a very good likelihood. Never mind an option. There's about an 80% chance that that's going to be the scenario in any given venture, unless you're just doing the safest, tidiest thing possible. And so the notion of failing was never a deterrent. I'd actually done stand-up in high school a couple times, and it went very well, and so I was encouraged by that. Like, I don't know, had I done it in high school and it bombed and got no laughs, it might have changed my trajectory, but I was encouraged enough by the response from the crowd in high school on variety night or drama night, when I did stand-up, that I thought, okay, maybe I can do this. Mm-hmm. And then I went down on amateur night that first time, February of 1988, and it just went really, really well. I've often said it's, been 35 years of me trying to chase a show that good again. Like, it couldn't have gone better. Wow. And the second week wasn't so great, but that first week it was so encouraging, and it instilled in me the notion that, okay, you probably can do this. Now let's see if you can get to where you can make a living. But the good thing for me is that I was in sort of a position where I was already barely making any money. Yeah. And so I didn't have to I got to leave my position as a brain surgeon to pursue comedy, my legal career. I just was like, I'll have to go from not doing this, not paying my bills by doing something I hate, to not paying my bills by doing something I love. And when I framed it like that, it's like, well, there's no choice here,
No choice.
Yeah.
I like that idea that there's no choice.
I always tell people, if you cannot do it, don't bother.
Right.
Like, it should be reserved, and I think there are certain things that are like that. There should be reserved for people who have no choice but to do it. People who are going to do it no matter what, whether they pay the bills or not. They're going to keep doing stand-up.
Well, I think that's a big part of it, because you have been extremely successful in your stand-up comedy, whether it's hosting the Junos, so many awards. You've been called the funniest man in Canada. You did a command performance for the Queen. And I think that your commitment to stand-up has really changed things. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I really think that committing to something as fully as you possibly can increases the odds of it being, I think it increases the odds of it being authentic. And once something is authentic, the odds of it actually clicking with other people or becoming something that people, take as valid is greatly increased. Like, authenticity is huge. I always say, people ask me about why Corner Gas was so successful. And I've always felt that, aside from the fact that I think it was a good show, I think we did a good job with it, and it was funny, and we cast the right people. aside from that, I think there was an authenticity to the show because we didn't think anybody was going to watch, and so we just did a show that we felt we could be proud of. And I think that authenticity, people picked up on that. They could tell they weren't being sold something. This wasn't a sitcom that was spewing out of a machine. It was shot in the wilds where no executives were around, and it sort of became an authentic thing.
At what point, at that point in your life, did you realize that you were going to be okay?
I think really when I turned 30. Once I turned 30, for whatever reason, I started getting a lot of corporate stand-up shows, which pay much better than playing in a club or doing a comedy and chicken wing night somewhere where you get $70. Corporate shows pay better. And when I was in my 20s, and I think it makes sense when you're in your 20s, people who are working in office jobs, they don't want to hear from a kid in their 20s. Like, what? But there's something about clicking over to 30 where it's like, okay, now he's a grown-up. And not that my stand-up was very, I never really took a stance of like, where I was telling people, here's how it is. I never had that sort of sense. But once I was 30, people were more willing to listen to me. And I started getting corporate shows. And that started paying the bills a little more. And that's when I kind of thought, okay, you're still doing the clubs, which that's the love of it is playing clubs. And it's like the perfect scenario for that art form. And the corporate shows were paying the bills. And I thought, okay, I can do this for a living now, Because prior to that, my 20s were really just scrounging gig to gig, hand to mouth, borrowing money when I needed to, not paying it back 8 out of 10 times. It was a real scramble. But my 30s, things started to level up.
And that's
it still involved really living a modest Spartan lifestyle, But it was starting to I was paying my rent on a regular basis.
That's very important. We have to take another break, but stay with us because we are going to talk about what life is like now for Brent, his latest creative leap, and one of the best pieces of advice I've heard when we come back. Welcome back. Brent, I wanted to talk about your latest creative leap. This is really why I wanted to have you on the show, is because you just seem to constantly try new things and take leaps into new creative genres.
Because my head won't shut up. If my head would just shut up, we'd all be fine.
And so here's your book, Huge, the novel. It's a thriller. I've read part of it, and I must say it is really good.
Well, thank you.
What I find so impressive is that you've gone from writing comedy, stand-up, scripts, movies, sitcoms. To me, it seems like a big leap to then write a novel. What?
And stylistically, it's very different from, this is my first novel. I've never done it before, and it's a big departure from anything I've ever done. This is not a comedy. This is, people who read it are kind of surprised. It's a very dark, gritty, psychological thriller. It's got some very violent moments in it. It's kind of a scary book. And I had this idea for a story. I knew I wanted to write a novel. And so I just started pecking away at it, and it turned into something.
Well, it really did. And as I say, it's really well written.
Thank you.
The characters are really engaging, and the setting being the whole stand-up world. And
that's one of the things I like. People have said who've read it, they said they learned a lot about what it's like being on the road as a comic. It's set in the mid-90s. And being, on the road as a comedian in the mid-90s, not a lot of glamour.
No.
And so, but people really learned. I wanted to sort of relay to people the little nuances that are involved in touring and what you look for in a room and the things you have to fight against and that kind of stuff.
I know, it was really fascinating in that way. And I really found that the way that you wrote it was very suspenseful, and it really is
Good,
a
I'm
psychological, it really is a psychological thriller. But I want to know sort of where you got the guts to think that, you just believe, you have this belief in yourself, probably from your childhood, that I think you one time said, oh, just give it a whirl. But
yeah, I grew up with the notion that failing was fine. It's okay to fail, so just give it a whirl and see see what happens. And I don't know if it was just a byproduct of, like I said, being the seventh kid, where it was like, look, don't bother me. Don't come to me with your concerns. Just give it a whirl. And if it falls apart, who cares? That's kind of the, I grew up with that sort of psychological safety net, that failing was fine. And so when I sat down to write this novel, I didn't sit down to write a bestseller. I sat down to see if I could write a novel and see if I could do it at all to begin with, never mind make it good, and see if I enjoyed the process. And it turned out I loved the process, so much so that I'm working on my next novel now. It was just very different, very unlike anything I'd ever written before. After years of writing scripts which are very structured, this was very freeing, and I loved the process and took to it.
What advice would you offer to people who are too afraid to pursue their dreams?
I think the first thing is to look at what's the downside. If the downside is it doesn't, you won't do what you want to do, well, you're not doing it now anyway. If you don't try it, you're just back to where you started anyway. So it sounds glib, but really, give it a whirl. It's soft advice, but it's really kind of prudent. It's got some weight to it. Give it a whirl. What have you got to lose? Now, I mean, if it's, if you're thinking, my dream is to be a mixed martial artist, well, okay, I can't help you there. There's some risk involved in that. Yes, you may have your neck broken. But if it's just a matter of like pursuing something artistically, something that drives you, something that, whatever it is, whatever gets you out of bed in the morning, that's where you should be spending all your efforts.
I absolutely love that advice. Thank you so much for your time here today. I can't believe our time is up already.
My pleasure.
And thank you for sharing your bold leaps with us. Thank you for making millions of us laugh our heads off in at least 26 countries.
Well, thank you.
The world needs more Brent Butt, that is for sure.
I'm going to get that on a t-shirt. I like that.
That's it for another inspiring story of Bold Leaps. Check us out on YouTube and social media for more episodes and updates. Tell us your bold leaps in the comments. Special thanks to our sponsors, and remember, every step you take is a step toward your dreams.